welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and I am absolutely delighted to be joined by two titans of comics, two people with such beautiful and impressive bodies of work. They are here to discuss a historically based murder mystery graphic novel that absolutely blew my mind. So welcome to the show. Could I ask you to introduce yourselves and your graphic novel?
Hello, I'm Robbie Morrison. I'm the writer of Heretic, the graphic novel Jen's just been waxing lyrical about.
And I'm Charlie Adlard. I drew it.
It's so nice to get to talk to you both. I've really admired your work for a very long time. And I was wondering if we could get started by talking a little bit about how you came to this collaboration. You've both been in comics for a while. You have, as I said, very impressive bodies of work. What brought you to this collaboration and this story?
Well, Robbie and I have known each other and been friends for many decades now. We first met back in the 90s, I think, Robbie. And
yeah, hard does it maybe to believe from the way we look these days?
Yes. And over the years, we have worked on other things together. Primarily, we did a book together in the mid-90s called White Death, which was, well, I think it was both of our first creator-owned books, and since then, you know, on and off, we've always remained in touch and collaborated on a few other things. And then, to cut a very long story short, when The Walking Dead was ending, because that was my bread and butter for 16 years, I knew, well, Robert and I discussed it many years prior, so I knew way in advance when we were going to finish. So I'm not the sort of one to have a project finish and then start thinking of the next one. So I wanted to get something lined up. So Robbie fortuitously moved very close to where I live, literally 5 minutes drive away. So the combination of Robbie moving near to where I am and the fact that The Walking Dead was finishing, I remember sort of getting in touch with you one day, didn't I? And just said, I think it's kind of inevitable. We'll work together again on something. And then Robbie created, well, this. Take it away, Robbie.
Oh, yeah. Well, initially when we had first started, we were chatting about a project. I now realise it was all top secret that Charlie was leaving The Walking Dead at that point. And I now realise I could have probably made some money in blackmail there if I had thought about it and sort of released that information. But no, we started chatting about some projects, and initially we were going to be doing a sort of contemporary thriller, a sort of Mexican drug cartel thriller. But I think I wrote a few pages of it and it wasn't quite coming together for me. I think partly because I just read Don Winslow's Mexican drug cartel trilogy and thought, wow, that's brilliant, and I can't do anything like that. So my other half, Deborah, reminded me about an idea I had on and off for 20 odd years ago of Heretic, which was about based on two real life historical characters. One was Cornelius Agrippa, who was a sort of real Renaissance man. He was a knight, a doctor, a lawyer, a philosopher, and reputedly a magician. And one of his pupils was a fellow called Johann Wehr, who was an equally illustrious scholar in his own day, and who went on to be an influence on Sigmund Freud, as in how Sigmund Freud quoted Johann Wehr as an inspiration of how Freud himself approached the sort of psychoanalysis and then the interrogative and investigative techniques he used to pick things apart. And when I had read that, I just thought, what a fascinating pair of characters who are, that surely they deserve to be brought back to life and put in a historical murder mystery of, of sinister proportions. And who better to draw that than Charlie Adlard, who's, a master of atmosphere and storytelling and horror. And I just thought that could work a little bit better than what we were initially planning. So, yeah.
You've both worked in both the graphic novel format and in serials. Do you have a format that you prefer? I'm sure that like working on a graphic novel, there's a lot less, well, maybe not less time pressure, I was thinking, because a serial you have to constantly be producing to schedule. Do you prefer?
Tell me about it.
Yeah. For 16 years, like that's a long time.
Well, again, fortuitously, we pretty much started Heretic in the end of 2019. So, what happened at the beginning of 2020? So we kind of had shall we say, I use this word very, very with tongue firmly in cheek, but we had plenty of time and piece to do to work on Heretic over the course of the next couple of years. But yeah, personally, I now, having worked, as I've been implying since you started asking that question, worked at, shall we say, the coalface of regular comics for 16 years with The Walking Dead. That's the last thing I want to do anymore. So personally, I prefer the finite format. Well, it's nice because then you get to tell the whole story. It's, you're guaranteed to tell the whole story, not sort of launch a series in the hope that it might last, and then you obviously arguably don't get to tell everything you want to do. So yeah, for me, it's, and I'm a huge, my favorite sort of format is French bande dessinée as well. So most of that is formatted in that kind of way, whether it's serialized books, but hey, they're still solid, beginning, middle, and end with a kind of a possible continuation. So I'm totally up for that side of it.
Well, I enjoy both, but I can see there is a certain beauty in doing a self-contained story that comes out in one volume, because obviously, if you're doing a serialized comic, whether it's weekly or monthly, you have to always try and end on a cliffhanger, and every now and again you have to force those cliffhangers because you have to put it in. Whereas at least with one volume, you can take your time and build the story in the way it actually it flows best and works best. And I think you can be. Because you can take your time, you can build the characterization a bit more rather than having to hit those sort of monthly or weekly. He's fallen out of the window. How's he going to survive? What happens next issue? Although at the same point, I'd like to think the way I sometimes view comics is you'd almost, when you're writing them, it's almost as if every page should be a cliffhanger. It's like, or it's the way you would call an ordinary novel a page turner. You want a comic book to be a page turner as well. So it has to have that flow of you reach the end of the page and think, I'll just read one more page. So if that sort of makes sense.
Yeah.
That's why Agrippa keeps falling out of windows every single page.
Yeah, that's it. If it works once, carry on with it.
Do it 120 times.
It works every time. You think they put a window guard up, but no, not really.
Oh yeah, well, those Belgians.
And it's interesting too, because as you were speaking, it occurred to me that when you're writing serially, you are sort of like married to the beginning that you establish. Like you cannot go back and change things so that you can have the ending that you want. So is there more fiddling, going back and forth in the script and editing when you work on a graphic novel like this?
No, Heretic sort of worked out quite smoothly. It all comes together. I think because also I've had the vague outline of the story in my head for going on 25 years or something, amazingly enough. I kind of knew how I wanted the story to come to an end, and how it was always going to begin with an interview with Sigmund Freud, who sort of then quotes the Johann Wehr. So you have an almost present day prologue which flashes back to the actual story. So no, it kind of worked in this case. Although sometimes it is quite nice if you've started something, and then when you see the artwork coming in, that can spark off, you know, from when you see the artwork, it sometimes sparks off something in your imagination, which will then make you think, well, I might change this scene slightly later on that hasn't been drawn yet, just to take account of into, you know, certain something that the artists have brought to it. Because obviously when you write scripts, you're trying to spark. It's the same way if you're writing a novel, you're trying to spark the reader's imagination so that everybody has their own vision of the story in their head. You try to do the same with an artist, so that, because obviously they get the script and you want to spark their imagination and their creativity and their ideas, so that comes into the story as well, so that it does become a collaboration. I mean, it begins with the script, but then as it goes on, and when Charlie and I have worked well together, so most of the time I kind of know, or I think I know how he's going to do something, and I know his storytelling style, so you can hopefully write to someone's strengths, and vice versa as well. When the artwork sort of, you kind of, I think we share a similar idea of storytelling or visual storytelling.
I've got a quick little funny story actually, because it shows how much this book's been in both our lives almost subconsciously. Is about halfway through the drawing of the book, I was just looking at some old artwork that I had, and I'd realised that I'd drawn the two main characters about 20 years before, because after Robbie and I had finished White Death, I seem to remember you sent me a bunch of proposals, which none of them we really sent out, or I can't remember. We obviously got distracted by other things, but I remember drawing up about 3 or 4 different things that Robbie was suggesting. One was science fiction, a science fiction sort of plot line. One was something more sort of basic horror. And then there was this historical one, and it was thinking Agrippa and Ware that I'd drawn. And I completely forgot about that until I came across the artwork again. So
did
little
I
did I
actually.
know that. Yeah, little did I know that I'd been in. Yeah, little did I know that I'd been in Robbie's head that long ago, and I'd actually done a character sketch for them all those years back.
Oh, probably had been in my head for, I had probably had it kicking around my head for a couple of years before that as well. So it's like, when they say these, it was 10 years in the making or something like this. This is kind of one of those projects.
I'd love to talk a little bit actually about those character designs. There's a moment early on, like when you first meet Agrippa, and he says like, "Oh, I bet you were expecting a wizened old wizard," and I was like, "Yes, I was." And then he looks so cool and young. So could you talk a little bit about, maybe like collaborating on character design, how that looks for you, and what was the the process behind that design? And I also love Juliet; she's so cool.
Well, I mean, there are no images of them anyway, so you are sort of, I suppose, for want of a better word, guessing what they might look like. You've got obviously a rough idea of their age and things like that from the historical documents, but so it was a complete blank canvas. I remember with Agrippa, I went through a couple of versions, didn't I? Not massively different from each other, but I think I did one and you suggested a few tweaks, and that was kind of it, wasn't it?
Yeah, at one point I think I suggested you should look at Samuel Beckett.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yes,
who had a fantastic face, but was probably too old and haggard looking from the photograph of Samuel Beckett that I had. So I think actually Samuel Beckett even begins to look a wee bit like one of the bad guys in the book, the Inquisitor, Bernard the Merrick, of the Chief Inquisitor, who's Agrippa's nemesis in the story.
That's right. Yeah.
But beyond that, I think I just kept remembering saying Basil Rathbone, Basil
Yeah.
Rathbone for Cornelius Agrippa, because in my head it's set in 1529. So in my head, what I was the kind of vibe I was going for writing it was Sherlock Holmes meets The Name of the Rose, but also with certain influences of, C.J. Sampson's Matthew Shardlake series of books and Wolf Hall and that sort of stuff. Though obviously I had the idea in my head before they were done. But yeah, because I had the Sherlock Holmes feel in my head, I just kept thinking of Basil Rathbone and that very, sharp-featured, almost arrogant intelligence where he believes he is one step ahead of everybody else in the room, and usually is, but perhaps every now and again, Johann Wehr, who's only was again, aged between 14 and 17 when when he studied under Cornelius Agrippa. Sometimes he's a little bit sharper, so I just thought it's a good chemistry between the two characters. And again, reading the historical, researching it, even when in later years, when Agrippa was being hounded by the Inquisition, and in fact, after his death, he was persona non grata amongst the Inquisition and the Church. Johann Wehr was still the only person who, spoke fondly and affectionately of him and defended him where everybody else, condemned him. I think history has obviously redeemed Agrippa because, the probably one of the things I should say, another fascinating thing about Agrippa was he was the first man to successfully defend a woman accused of witchcraft by the Inquisition and get them off and save her life. But obviously that made the Inquisition after that hated him forever, which is part of the point in the graphic novel. There's a series of murders in Antwerp in Belgium in 1529, and the murders seem possibly supernatural in nature. So the Inquisition forced Agrippa on pain of death to investigate, because as he is an acknowledged expert on the occult, they think, he could possibly solve it. But because they were sworn enemies, it's almost like giving him enough rope to hang himself, because if he doesn't solve it, then they can accuse him of being a heretic and an enemy, and they've got him. But then, so really, they're even though they're trying to collaborate with him, or it looks as though they're trying to collaborate with him, really they just want him to fail so they can condemn him and burn him at the stake, as it was their hobby half the time.
Yeah, the Inquisition, I think, sort of thrived on, among other things, like creating these catch-22, damned if you do, damned if you don't situations to trap people. The successfully defending a witch against the Inquisition is a primo opportunity for a prequel for this. But it's such a fascinating story that both him and Weyer were very ahead of their time in terms of their views, not only of the witch hunt and the Inquisition, but of women in general. Like they were very much ahead of their time in how they view gender relations, it seems like. And that leads me to questions about research for the both of you, because you mentioned, Robbie, that you were doing some historical research. I'm wondering what that looked like, what you looked at. And Charlie, what did you look at if you did any sort of visual research? Because there's some really gorgeous, very detailed architecture and, city material culture in there.
Well, I am, anything I do, I'm big on the getting it right sort of thing as much as possible. You'll always get something, because Robbie and I would be the first to admit we aren't experts on this. Just as a quick aside, I remember we did years ago, we did a sort of a panel. I think it was something to do with commemorating the beginning of the First World War, wasn't it? And we did this panel, and the people in the audience were far more expertise, had far more expertise in World War One, which is what White Death was about, than we did. And it ended up being them just kind of talking amongst themselves. And you and I just sort of sat fairly sort of dumbstruck on stage because we literally could not compete with their knowledge, because at the end of the day, we learned, a bit about the particular part of the war we were doing, and that was it. So Heretic is, I suppose, very similar in terms of doing the research. If it wasn't for the pandemic, I seriously think we'd have gone to Antwerp itself and got some inspiration from it, because, a book that's so location specific, I think it would have been really, a really sort of positive thing to do. Generally I'd say I wouldn't bother doing something like that because I've never worked on a book, before or after, which has just had that feel of place so much. So, obviously pandemic and everything, I had to rely on good old Google image search, basically. So forgive me if there's any sort of fudges, because the problem is, there isn't that much research in, 16th century Antwerp that you can Google. So you've got to take a few liberties, and there was a couple of things where I I didn't have the exact location or the exact costume, so you just look at other costumes or locations from that period and shroud them in shadow so people don't really notice. So it was a bit of that, but I was trying to get it as accurate as possible and get that feel across. And it was a challenge. It was a lot of sat at my computer sort of having looking at obviously reference and things like that. But there again, I often think, well, if we did go to Antwerp, there aren't that many 16th century buildings left standing either. So of course, arguably we could have got there and seen exactly what you can get. Okay, I could have taken more photographs from different angles and things like that, but to get just the most basic imagery, I think we'd have been struggling. I think we'd have gone there more for the feel of the place and just to get that sort of inspiration.
No, I tend, it's good to try and get it as historically accurate as you can, but at the same point, I think I tend to reassure myself but we are actually doing a work of fiction. So I think you can always take certain liberties, as long as you don't go too far, having a sports car driving past in the background or anything ridiculous like that. There's a word that verisimilitude, which means it might not exactly be right, but it feels right to the reader. So I think because we are creating a world that's it's based on the historical reality, but it's still created. It's through my sort of story sense and through Charlie's artwork. So it's not reality. So I don't tend to worry too much about it in that respect. I mean, I researched, probably the main book I used was The Life and Times of Cornelius Agrippa by Henry Morley, which I read in the Mitchell Library in Glasgow decades ago and photocopied lots of, and then managed to get it on Google Books or something. I then managed to get another copy of it via that. I read up general histories of the time to try and get a feel of that. I read little bits of Cornelius Agrippa's own. He wrote 3 volumes of occult philosophy, which, no offense to Cornelius Agrippa, they were pretty hard going and it was kind of over my head, but I tried. And obviously the other thing I read books on the Inquisition and the witchcraft trials, and snippets of the Malleus Maleficarum, which was the Hammer of Witches, which was the book, which was the Inquisition's Bible on how to, try witches and condemn them, which is one of the most ridiculous flights of fancy or fantasy. If you ever read any bits of it, you think people believed this at the time, but they did. I mean, obviously the Inquisition were using it for reasons of political reasons and censorship and oppression. It was almost their excuse to keep the general population and women especially in their place. But you do look at it nowadays and you think this is just absolutely bonkers.
I'm so glad that you brought that up. I think there's like that all plays into my final question, which is about the relevance of this book to the modern day. That's something that that I think has to do with like when you are writing historical fiction. Yes, you are using the past, but you are telling modern stories or stories that matter to modern people. And so that also kind of plays a role. And I'm wondering if, in the time that you've been working on it sort of intensely, like since 2019, have you been shocked at all to discover how relevant it actually turned out being?
Yes, in some ways. I mean, you don't. I'd like to say no, but yeah, I think in some ways since we've started it with it's hard to know actually where to start.
Yeah.
This information, the women's rights in America and in the world in general, the whole what's been happening in Israel and Gaza and the anti-Semitism and everything that's going around. While you were writing a book that's set all these years ago, you can see. Oh, I mean, I'm not saying it's we've been pressing it around. It's just on a very broad basis, you can see the disinformation and the oppression of free speech and censorship, and just the threat of the Inquisition held in the sort of political and religious, moral, just across the board. It's kind of sad to look at it and think it's the more things change, the more they stay the same sometimes. And it's a bit disconcerting, really.
Just go to show how we don't learn from history, is it? Really?
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. But no, well, yeah, I can't really add anything more to that. I obviously agree with Robbie. But yeah, doing a book like this, you do realise that things haven't really got, well, they have got better, but perhaps they're just better hidden.
Yes. Yeah.
It is funny because as storyteller, really, we're just aiming mainly to tell an entertaining story that, if people can read anything more into it of significance or any parallels with modern society, then I think then great. But they are there, but I think they are there because, things haven't changed as much as you like. And it was one of the things I did want to try and do because Agrippa and Weir in their day, I mean, they were taking, when they were speaking out against things, they were kind of taking their lives in their own hands. And I wanted to try and stress that how dangerous it was for them to be individuals and to speak out back then. And, and the same thing can happen nowadays, maybe not on nobody's going to get hung, drawn and quartered as they were possibly in danger of in their times, but certainly people can be victimized these days. It's for speaking out, and people are always too happy to condemn and attack each other rather than understand each other. It's I kind of want to.
Yeah, you can certainly get digitally hung, drawn, and quartered nowadays.
Yes, that's absolutely true.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I was reading it, there were the two things that stuck out to me as so relevant to our times are ruling through fear and how that is linked up to scapegoating. And you see that happen both to women in Antwerp and to the Jewish community. And so there's like a lot of really interesting, like I don't think many storytellers sort of set out to accomplish that kind of relevance, but like sometimes it just kind of happens. So it's very interesting. It's an interesting moment to be reading it for sure.
Well,
Yeah, well,
yeah.
he-
No, no, sorry. Yeah, just quickly, I've often said, and I think I said it to Robbie as well. Now in the the twilight years of my career, I feel I don't really want to do anything that's I don't really like using this word, but trivial anymore. I'd rather do stuff that has some sort of substance. So, you're not going to find me drawing, sort of spandex wearing people fighting other spandex people for a bit of fun. I'm not saying I want to be deadly serious either all the time and furrowed brow, but I just feel like now my work has, every project I do has to have some kind of meaning, some sort of, whether it's political or whatever. And obviously Heretic fits all those categories. So yeah, it's just nice now to sort of try and make some sort of social impact, I suppose, for want of a better word.
Yeah.
Although, in case, just to jump in and sort of burst the mood there, in case that makes Heretic sound really, really heavy, there's actually
No.
a bit of humour in it occasionally as well. It's about two characters who are, finding their, there's a lot of humour in Agrippa and Johann Wehr's relationship, and there's a lot of humour between Juliet Agrippa, Cornelius's daughter, and Johann Wehr, and just their relationship. So there's, because I always think that's how, if you're telling a story, one of the best ways to make people care about the characters and bring them to life is to use humour, because it's the easiest way to make people like the characters. Whereas if it's all grim and gritty, then it can be a bit too much. It's always my take on it. So I like to think, yeah, everything we've just said is in there, but at the same point, it has hopefully quite a strong strand of humour and compassion and pathos in there.
Oh no, I absolutely agree. Don't worry, I wasn't advocating just sort of just the most dour sort of storytelling all the time. But no, I was. It's kind of just doing something of worth, whether you tell it through comedy, horror, drama, science fiction. All genres are always open. But yeah. No, I totally agree. You've got to have that sort of sense of fun as well. But within that fun, there has to be substance.
Substantial fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this isn't a spoiler, it's just a frame for my one last question. At the end, our frame narrator, in the form of like a text from Freud, suggests that there are other stories that are just as fantastical about the exploits of Agrippa and his assistant. Do you have more stories in this world, or is that just like a tantalizing glimpse at like history we might not view? Or what's next for you both?
Well, I suppose it's a bit of both. I always like to. It's like, yeah, there's a possibility of more stories with Agrippa and Weir, to a degree. I have loose ideas, but yeah, it's always it's nice, but at the same point, if it is just that tantalizing, because their lives carried on after that, if it's just a tantalizing hint that there was more to them, then I'm happy with both. But yeah, definitely, it's the characters are strong enough to carry on, and as they might say about today, they certainly lived in interesting enough times to bring more back. Yeah.
Oh, great.
No, well, same. I agree. I mean, I'd be more than happy to return at some point. Let's see how the book sells first.
Well, yeah. There are other harsher realities involved there.
Very true.
Yeah.
Well, now it's on the audience then. I'm going to put it to them to buy Heretic wherever you like to buy your comics. It is such a good story. The art is absolutely beautiful. The writing is so clever and so funny. Like, because Agrippa is very funny. Like, he loves making fun of people, which I really enjoy. Oh, yeah. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been so lovely, and I really appreciate you sharing the story with me.
That's
You're
great. Well,
welcome.
thank you
Thank
very
you,
much
Jen.
for having us. It's been a
Yep.
lot of fun.
Take care.
All right. It's time to close this chapter. Goodbye, audience. Bye.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.